I wanted to make sure that you guys had something that you can use from this last segment as well. So I wanted to make sure that you get to actually try to apply some of this stuff. And this is where the tiered pyramid method discussion starts to come together with the MDA discussion that we started out with. So, like we discussed at the very beginning, the mechanics and the dynamics and the aesthetics, you kind of know how this works now. So you know how you need to progress to make sure that you get a certain emotional response from the players. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sit down, if we can, in the same groups that we were before, and go through this as an exercise for the TPM, right? Pretty simple. There's only 4 steps to it. Number 1 is choose an existing game, ideally one you have worked on or are working on. So basically the same game that you did in the previous exercise. Number 2, identify its high-level goals. So this is where you apply your MDA. What do I want the player to feel? What behavior is consistent with that? What mechanics are consistent with that? Then identify the features and content that you would need to achieve these goals as soon as possible. Features, of course, more important than content, but if some sort of content is super important, then of course put that in there. And then you divide the rest of the game into tiers until you reach the final product. Now, I'm going to try to help you out with how to visualize this because it might not be super obvious. So I'm going to erase this. So one way of doing this is to basically follow the step-by-step process that we defined here, at least to a certain degree. Basically by setting up your own tiers. Now it's going to be a bit difficult because you're working with pen and paper primarily, I suppose. But you can basically just set up your own product here. So you can go like this, and you can call this tier 1, right? And then you just start at the very most high level. You identify your features, and you might go player mechanics, that's PM. So PM1, I suppose. And then whatever else. Opposition 2, or sorry, 1 again. Whatever else. AI, if applicable. You know, whatever you call these features, you start off at that very most high level, and then you do a second separate pass where you start adding bullet points underneath it, right? And you keep doing this at a lower and lower level of detail, right? So I would start by taking the features at the most top level and actually go kind of all the way up to the top of the pyramid to illustrate the fact that you're applying your high-level design, right? So I would take player mechanics, opposition, AI, whatever that might be, and add those all the way up, and then you go back down again and add more detail. And considering where you're supposed to be in your projects, you probably have quite a bit of information to put there. So this is not to suggest that you should try to show how the game is right now. Try to make these as small as possible. If it would have been possible for you to make smaller slices than you actually have in the game right now, try to do that as an exercise. So one way to illustrate this is for a base level deliverable, I have at one point actually used a placeholder which was a wireframe UI that I had put together, which had a bunch of buttons that didn't do anything, but they pretended like they did. Right? That was my base level, and it didn't actually function, but it was good enough to actually show people how it was meant to work. So maybe not put it at that level, because that was a very special case. That was when the feature was going to be absolutely enormous. We just needed to have something there for the time being. But try to think a little bit in those terms, right? So how basic can you make? Let's say you have a combat mechanic that has, you know, spells or something like that. Or let's say you have some sort of building mechanics where you can place buildings or something like that. Try to get it down to a point where if you're building up a bunch of, you know, different structures and whatever, do you really need to be able to choose where they are placed as a tier 1? When you think about it, Is it really that important in a city building simulator that you can choose where you put your buildings from a purely functional point of view? Because in most city building simulators, that's actually not the case. The building position doesn't actually affect the economy. That's actually true for a lot of those games. So maybe that shouldn't be in tier 1. Maybe actually choosing where you put your building should be a later feature. So try to do that as an exercise. Try to identify. If you never get to this super low level, that's fine too. This is just so that you guys can go through the exercise and just wave to me whenever you need help with anything, and I'll try to help you out as much as possible. The point should be, though, that whenever you look at one of these tiers, ask yourselves, is this hitting my goals for aesthetics, dynamics, and mechanics? Is it making people play the game the way I want them to in order to accomplish the emotions, right? So there's no time limit for this. When you get bored, just go home. So thanks so much for your time. I'm going to be here for another hour, right? Rock and roll.